Okay, so thank you, everyone. So as per introduction, Tom Wills. So I'm going to talk to you a bit about making APIs easy and why that in itself is actually not so easy to do. So as a bit of background, I'm going to talk about the Bendigo vision and where we start off. That relates directly to the platform, so just bear with me while we start at high level, and then we go down to more specifics on how this works at the engineer and the developer level. So Bendigo's vision overall is to be Australia's bank of choice and feed into prosperity and not off of it. And as part of doing that, there are three imperatives that we talk about. So reducing complexity, invest in capability, and tell our story. Now, they're pretty abstract concepts. So how do you translate that down into APIs and what you're doing with that? We've got some messages up on screen which relate to that, and that is really about digital strategy, how our platforms are used and what they're for. And that's also about having a simpler tech landscape. But to be really specific, when I'm talking about making APIs easy, then the way that I think about that is APIs are not so easy when you ask someone to make a decision, or they need to make a decision that they don't fully understand. So it's easy if you know what the choices are and what the implications are. The moment you get outside of that, that's when you get into a slightly trickier space. So a starting point for trying to make it easy, you have to start with where you are. And that starts off with some inputs, and whether this is moving to a new platform, whether this is some kind of uplift, then inputs for your current situation is the right place to be. There's always some obvious ones on things that don't work, things that people dislike, things you wish you could get rid of. There's also some things that people know that they love, and that's the vocal side of it. It's just as important to look at the unspoken side. So what is it that really you know works, keeps you safe, but people don't talk about it very often because you can't lose that in the same time. There's no one right answer for how you gather those kind of inputs. This is all about being data-driven as much as you can, but there's not one format. There's not a survey or a particular kind of gathering it. You just have to time box it, get the best you can, and get an understanding. And for anyone thinking that that's starting to sound a bit waterfall, you could be building a refined, sized, prioritized Scrum backlog. That could be work that teams ready to pull in via Kanban. That could be defining your service level indicators, your service level objectives in site reliability engineering. It could be continuous improvement. It's methodology agnostic, but you have to start with the what. Where is it you want to get to? So that vision overall, and you have to be able to look over it and say, well, some of those problems we just can't solve, but what can we do, and where can we try and get to? It's very faint. There is a slight outline of an iceberg just underneath the vision, just to slightly indicate that it's not quite as simple as it sounds. May not sound simple already, but the question that I'd ask you to be thinking about, and I'll give you my answers as we go through, is where do you think that hidden complexity is? Because there are some gotchas in this kind of process, and I'm going to talk through our approach to solving for those. So when you've got a backlog, you've got some stuff you're working through, then you can start with putting it all together. Your initial version is likely to work. It's likely to be a long way away from production, so you're going to want to do some stuff to reinforce it and get it slightly more stable than the stack of pebbles that might be functionally there, but not quite ready. Definitely not for a banking environment, but probably not for anybody. In terms of starting points, automation and DevOps, obvious places. So declarative configuration, going into GitOps, having workflows that everything's approved through merge requests, making sure that you're not actually letting anyone really do anything through a kind of a ClickOps side of things, and everything defined as code. That's a decent place to start overall. Beyond that, then starting to go into resilience and scalability. So these days, that's very likely to be in at least one hyperscaler environment across multiple availability zones, likely to be in Kubernetes with some kind of management plane and split of responsibility going on. And you should be using a tool that is self-healing and very high performance by default. So you're hitting a lot of the right things on that scalability and resilience. And there should be testing and validation. And that works on the two levels of stopping the bad things from happening. So my go-to example being someone publishes an API that really doesn't authenticate anyone properly and lets them talk directly to a database that's got a bunch of sensitive data in it. You can deploy that, and if you've only got your automation controls, that's going to pass all the way through, and it's going to do really bad things. So how do you stop that one? And then for people doing the right things, how do you nudge them into the right kind of place overall? There's the obvious stuff on pen testing, load testing, recovery testing. You should have all of that, but that's really just about getting your platform in. There's another iceberg that's kind of hidden under there with that one. My explanation for that one is hidden complexity is it's not just about the platform. So my team, we run the API management platforms, run the API gateways for Bendigo Bank. We do make sure that they're up and that they're working. I think one of the things that we're most pleased with recently is there's a health check that's called Sting, which is so there is no gateway. It doesn't go off. It's very resilient. It does work. Middle Earth reference also possibly might be lost on some people, but anyway. But it goes a lot beyond that. So you need to also be thinking about security, permissions and identity, performance, incident management, testing and release. And it's not about the API team trying to do everything. It's about collaboration and working together. That's the hidden complexity in all this stuff, is it's not just about getting the gateway stable, but it's not trying to do everyone else's job as well. There has to be this bit where we're all kind of working together. But while we're doing that, meanwhile, there's a load of expectations that may or may not have come out of that earlier conversation to get all those inputs. So on the business side of things, APIs are pretty exciting. There's a whole bunch of transformation things you can do with APIs. We've got API business models that you can do stuff with. You can partner with people. The Bendigo CIO talks about APIs as letting you renovate one room of the house at a time, which is an analogy for part of how we can look at it for our transformation objectives. And another piece of speaking to one of our business leaders recently, and their observation was if they understand our API catalog internally well enough, then they can have a conversation just amongst their team, amongst their peers, and they can solve business problems without needing to talk to the technology team, which is what we want as well. We want them to be able to solve that so that by the time they come to us with something that's hard and difficult, they're genuinely coming to us with something that we need to build, not trying to figure out what we already have. That's quite a lot of expectations, and that's quite a wide scope of things. And then, as all the engineers and developers in the room will know, it's very relaxed and low expectations, just wanting everything to be self-service with all of the features and functionality supported for the most cutting-edge stuff and legacy support, and really easy to use and pre-book patterns. So no real high expectations or anything there. So the other iceberg that's sort of hidden in the middle is how does that gel with the vision and those imperatives I talked about at the beginning? Because if we want to reduce complexity, we want to invest in capability, which means not trying to train everyone on every possible thing. How do we then bridge that against what we're looking at here? The answer can be a little bit like this, which is that you end up with a big gap. So if you're the team that has effectively the rocket car, you're good. You can realize the vision. You exactly know where you're going, and there's kind of what's the problem? You're able to get where you want to go. For a lot of other people, you've not really got the ability to get through. And this goes back to what I was talking about at the beginning on what is it that you're asking people to do. Some people need to make some decisions here that they don't fully understand. And they might make it. They could make a leap of faith, and maybe they land on the other side. But some of them are going to fall down in the water, and then that means that they need some help in order to get themselves in a good spot. And no one really wants to be talking about rework, especially not if you haven't already got something live, or it's not the place you want to be. And it's quite faint as well, but there is a current that runs under API rework if you don't get to them fast enough, which starts to drag you back towards legacy transformation, which it's not great, but it's familiar and you kind of know how it works already. So maybe you can just do that this one time and you'll do APIs next time. That's what we need to avoid. That's the gap. We can build a great platform and we can set really good expectations, but the two have to come together. And that's really about that. There's a phrase that we use for thinking about a lot of this, which is digital by design and human when it matters. And that's about, in this context, that's about really trying to get into what are we asking people to do, and have they got the right support that they need in order to be able to do all of the things that we're asking of them. So the answer to that we have, and analogy is used in various places, but a paved road and off-roading is the way that we talk about it. So your paved road, that's pretty prescriptive, but you can go fast. And that is one of the main points of the paved road, is you can go fast. And you are not asked to make any choices that you do not understand. And you do have the support you need. But it is prescriptive, so it's mainly REST APIs. There's probably a framework that we're going to point you to. There's probably some standards that we're going to want you to stick within for rate limiting, and there's probably a bunch of things that actually maybe that isn't for you. Maybe you're one of those people looking at that thinking, I already hate it. I don't want to go on the paved road. That's not me. Off-roading is the other part of that. And that isn't just to give the people that want to do that something to go and do. That is the other part of the equation. Because you need to also have your people who are out there trailblazing and experimenting. That can be people on the platform side, so that can be members of my team, that can be members of other teams that are running core platforms, or it can be teams out there doing things. So an example is recent conversation I had with someone about GraphQL. We're not heavily using GraphQL. It's an area that, but there's a conversation about it, and the team that are doing it have got the right, have got what we look for. They're not going into unprepared. They're not driving. I'm not really a car person, so I can't give you a good car analogy, but they're not ready for off-roading. Sorry, they are ready for off-roading. So they're a good example for going off with that. And that also has to be about collaboration. So they can't just set off into the distance with off-roading, because that gets into its own trouble. Because this is why I started off with the strategy at the beginning. It all has to come back towards the same thing. We need to be reducing complexity. We need to be investing in capability. And we need to be telling our story, which is about letting people actually do what they originally wanted to do, what they set out to do in the first place. So that off-roading serves two really important purposes. One is it cycles back to where you can go and lets people experiment and helps expand what the paved road is. So over time, people are going to mature overall. The second thing is it does mean that the teams that are able can do what they want with more freedom, but in a more controlled way. And it does all really come back to collaboration and being able to define the standards. So ultimately, off-roading is about defining the future standards that we don't yet have within that paved road setup. So probably pushed it about as far as that one then can go, but it is also about it being a journey and going as far as you can to be able to recognize that none of this stands still. So the market's not standing still. Everything is continuing to push ahead. The feature sets that need to be available, the level of skill that we've got in the organization will continue to increase. So it all has to keep moving, and ultimately it's about enablement and collaboration to be able to make that make all of that work. The final thing I would say is, so I started off with saying making it easy and why that's not actually that easy to do, why that's relatively hard work. aside from all of that bridging of things, there's a huge piece on a colleague that talks about APIs as we're centralizing to decentralize. And there's a huge piece of communication within that. And that's not to be underestimated in this space. The definition of easy needs to be an ongoing conversation. And it's not one definition. So even this is an oversimplification, but it has to have some constraints. And part of that is also about I shouldn't just ever say no to something just because of the team that I'm running or the responsibility I've got. It should be a conversation. And we should be able to get to a point where ultimately this goes back to the strategy. What are we really trying to get to? Because if there's a good enough reason, we can find a way to do it. But if there's a point where it doesn't align, that's where we should figure out why. And we may not always agree, but there are some hard conversations to be had in that. And that's why it has to have that relationship. Back and forth overall. I think that's everything I had on that one. So I'll say, are there any questions?
Thanks, Tom. Welcome to take any questions. Yeah. Jason?
So with your off-roading, so platform off-roading, how do you manage building out experimental features into a platform at the same time as running? Are you running a separate experimental platform? Like, how do you manage that?
So it's not a separate platform. We do have multiple development environments. So it's a bit bounded by what people are trying to do. But we'd want to build it in a way where there's a level of coexistence that can happen. We try and run with a pretty decentralized model anyway, so that nothing's really interfering. If we've got a problem at that level, I'd want to try and address that early before going ahead. I'm not interested in setting up separate gateways, or it's one of the things. It would be a big deal to be setting up separate gateways, and if we've got some kind of conflict that exists, then we should pick that up early and try and figure it out. We haven't hit anything so far that we can't actually just have coexist on the platform and just decentralize that. Identity is the trickiest part with that, but as long as we are clear on what we're doing, we can do that.
Off-roading is definitely an interesting model, especially when you have teams looking to create new ways of working, and having that a funding model that can support that also seems to be challenging to enable teams to innovate, but with a constrained risk environment where they encourage that people to fail successfully.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is driven. So it really comes back to people, and that's kind of where the whole like human when it matters thing kind of really comes through for me. Is that we can build out systems that are self-service. That really should be the aim. Everything, as much as possible of what I provide and support, should be just something that people can use without needing to book a meeting or arrange anything. When you want to, though, try something else, as long as you know what you're doing and we can make those, if there's choices you need to figure out, we can do that together, then there should be no reason not to, unless it genuinely is a bad idea, and I don't want to talk about that instead. But there shouldn't be anything we avoid talking about.
Thanks, Tom. Any more questions?
Where does education and training fit into your journey there, mate?
So where does education and training fit in? That, I think it would go across the whole. It would go across the whole life cycle, because I think you could apply the. You could apply the concept across both of those. So off-roading, then that's people pushing themselves right at the limits, and that might be that we're actually testing out a new feature that isn't even GA yet with in a product. That's education and learning. At the other end, someone could be developing the very first API, and there should be some material in that. But self-service has its limits. There always has to be some things where people have got the right level of support. So it should be a bit calibrated, but there should also be some standard things available to help people from wherever they're starting.
Thanks, Tom. Really appreciate the time. Round of applause to Tom, guys.